This happened to me a few years ago, probably back in 2017 when I was 14. I still think about this encounter almost every day. My dad lives near a small lake in Wisconsin. There are only about 100 people who live in the neighborhood. My brother and I spent every other weekend up there, so we knew pretty much everyone. My dad's house was the second house to the top of this large hill. At the very top is the gas station and the diner where I would work over the summer. At the bottom of the hill was the lake and a small beach. That morning I was waitressing at the diner, and at the end of my shift I bought a slushie from the gas station, and I was planning on going down to the beach for the afternoon. Parked outside the diner was a gorgeous teal vintage car. I'm not sure what brand, I'm not good with that stuff, but it seemed to be from the 60s and it caught my eye. It was an older man in the driver's seat, and his wife in the passenger seat. They had their windows up, and I wasn't too close, so I didn't get a great look at them, but I did notice they were looking at me. I didn't think anything of it, and we started walking home. On my walk home, I remember wondering where they could be from. We don't get many tourists, and I would have remembered if someone drove a car like that. The diner was off of a pretty quiet highway, and it was rarely used by out-of-towners, but I assumed they were just driving through. My younger brother and I went to that beach that afternoon and hung out for a few hours. When we decided to head home, I packed up my stuff probably a minute before he did and started walking home before him. On the walk up the hill, there was probably half a city block's distance between us. He could clearly see me, but we were too far to talk. I heard a car coming towards me and looked back and moved to the side of the street. It's the car I saw earlier at the diner. They slow down as they approach me, and I start to get nervous. The woman in the passenger seat rolls down her window, and I nearly shit my pants. They both seem to be wearing hyper-realistic latex face masks. There seemed to be no beginning and no end to the mask. There weren't noticeable holes for eyes, yet their eyes definitely seemed real, and there was no seam at the edge of the neck. If they were wearing masks, they were some of the best masks that I've ever seen. It must have cost a fortune, but it definitely wasn't their skin. There's no way. Something about them was just so off. The woman asked me for directions to a highway that I've never heard of. I didn't drive yet, so this in and of itself wasn't weird, but I pointed them to the highway by the diner that leads out of town. They thanked me, rolled up the window, and drove away. I ran to my brother and told him what happened, and he said they looked pretty normal when they drove past him, but they looked normal to me that morning as well. The masks were just too good. You had to be close enough to notice how strange they looked. There was just something so unsettling about them. They didn't really do anything odd except asking a girl who was clearly too young to drive for directions, but it was a very small community. I might have been the first person they had seen in hours. It was just the way they looked. I'd never seen anything like it, and I haven't seen anything like it since then. I mentioned it to my dad when I got home, but he didn't have much to say about it. I still feel deeply unnerved when I think about it more than 6 years later. I don't believe in much in the paranormal stuff, and I do think they were human, but why the masks? What were they doing there, and why ask a child who was obviously too young to drive for directions to a highway? Has anyone ever experienced something like this before? The creepy guy I dated is a murderer. As a teenager, I waited tables in a local restaurant to pay for the gas in my car. I met Mr. Creep there. In my naive mind, he seemed normal at first, despite the fact that he was 20 and wanting to date a 17-year-old. Leaving my job after dark scared me, so I taught myself to get into my car, shut the door, and lock it in one fluid motion. It made me feel safe. One night I was leaving work and had just gotten into my car when Mr. Creep seemed to just appear out of nowhere, yanking my door handle to try to open it. I looked into his eyes into the split second before he smiled, and what I saw absolutely chilled me to my bones. I don't know how to describe the evil I saw. From then on, I was terrified of him, but I didn't let on because I was afraid of what he might do if I told him I never wanted to see him again. After this, he constantly lied to try to impress me and tried to invent ways of being alone with me, but my instinct was to run, so I avoided him. About 2 weeks after this incident, the restaurant got robbed and there was significant evidence against Mr. Creep, just not the kind that allowed the cops to charge him. I sent all of my text conversations with Mr. Creep to the police chief in hopes that it would help. Mr. Creep slithered away after that, but I always looked over my shoulder. About 5 years ago, he messaged me on Facebook out of the blue. He went on about his top secret military clearance as well as a huge acreage that he owned. It made me nervous and I felt like he was trying to spring a trap or something, but I tried to put it out of my mind. Then today, I was looking at posts about an unsolved murder when I saw his mugshot. He is now facing murder charges, as well as 2 other violent felony charges. I'm so glad to know he's locked up, but so overwhelmed about how correct my instincts about Mr. Creep were. I feel like I escaped him. This is a story of someone I knew and had cut ties with because he was a fucking psycho. The first half will be to add context as to why I cut him off, and the second half is what makes it a let's not meet. I don't know if he uses Reddit, so I'll admit ages and locations. It started about 4 years ago when I was living in a friend's house while attending a nearby university. It was myself, my friend, his sister, and their parents. Roughly about 2 weeks into staying there, my friend's sister invited her boyfriend to live in the house too, and by all accounts, he was a pretty cool guy at first. Very sociable and full of great stories. We often sat around the table for drinks and talked about life, having a smoke in the garden. Within the first month, however, as he started to get comfortable, cracks started to show in his veneer. He would rant about government conspiracy, how he was always a wronged party. He was big into Sigma male bullshit, and martial arts, and Christ did he have a temper. He had this big dog he always kept in a cage that was extremely violent when he wasn't around. The dog attacked his girlfriend and had to be put down. That's when the guilt trips torture began and the ranting became incessant. About 2 months later, he had the bright idea to live in a shipping container, mainly because the parents wanted him out, and dragged his girlfriend along for the ride. I'm not talking about one of those little cheap restoration jobs. This was a rented container, in a storage yard among the outskirts of the town we were living in. He would intimidate and threaten the staff there constantly until they called the police. This, of course, was another conspiracy. He became increasingly abusive to his girlfriend to the point where the family got involved to get her out of there. I stuck close to them, having to pretend to be on his side until we could safely get her out. They broke up, which he blamed me for, claiming I was poisoning her against him to make her mine. She has a new partner now, and they're happy. We all blocked the Psycho X on everything possible, but he continued to harass them until eventually he disappeared, or so we thought. Fast forward to last year, I started to receive messages over social media from several different accounts, blocking each one in turn when I discovered who it was, some friendly and some hostile. One of these profiles, however, was pretending to be someone I knew from university. We talked about life and how things were going. Eventually, I was invited to a house party, claiming it was a free house and plenty of people were coming. I booked the time off work, made my travel plans, and kept talking to his friend coming up to the date of the party. I mentioned it to my friend's sister, and she was interested in going herself. Until I mentioned the address, and she panicked. The address in question was a property belonging to the crazy ex's father that was scheduled for sale. I waited until the day of the party and called the police to check the property, claiming a suspected break-in. They found 5 people there, including the ex. Parked out in the front was a butcher's van equipped for food storage and a collection of knives, hammers, and rope. I'm glad I didn't go.